Welcome everyone, Christine here with the discussion about Kislev in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. In this particular video, I want to cover their economy and the reasons it is certainly a rope around your neck that is going to severely limit your campaign potential. This is turn 20 as a campaign as Boris Ursus. It is a campaign that I have effectively won. Archeon is dead by my hand. Front is, well, down to one settlement over here. I have control of Prague. I have control of Volksgrad. I have control of the Blood Marshes and Bloodfire Falls. And soon enough, I will also have control of the Skull Road. And then I'm just going to introduce Drazov to his Lord and Savior. And eventually, I should hopefully be able to confederate both Kostaltin and Katrin in this particular campaign. So the power to do well in a campaign, at least as Boris Ursus, is certainly there. The reason Boris Ursus does so well in an early game is he has arguably the strongest starting army of any faction in the entire game. He starts with 2 tier 3 units, 2 tier 4, tier 2 units, 2 tier 4 units, and a Patriarch for replenishment, and he can get the Frost Maiden very early on, especially if you use the load character system. Now, some people complain about, like, oh, you shouldn't use the load character system. This is not a mod. This is something Creative Assembly literally added into the game. Why wouldn't you use it? I mean, if you have an issue with it, tell Creative Assembly to change the system, because as long as it's part of the core game, complaining that people are using a mechanic that's actually part of the game is a bit silly from my personal perspective on the subject. That is precisely where I do stand on that note. However, why does Kislev struggle in a campaign when you can achieve a result like this? This is a good result by any measure of the game. Well, it comes down to one thing and one thing alone. Economy, economy, economy. Now, there's other things, the invocation system being crap, the supporter system being crap, devotion not being good. Absolutely. But the principal issue that Kislev does have in their campaigns is economy. The reason is their basic economic structure costs all the way 2,000 for 200 income. It will take 10 turns to recover the money from this. Then you can go all into caravans, which are 4,000 for 300. This is going to be 15, well, roughly 15 turns to make the money back. And you're only generating that. You can buff up the tradable resource production by 50% in the province. But 50% trade resource production means that you're taking things like logs, and you're going from 45 to, what is it, close to 70, basically. That is not necessarily significant. It is a nice benefit, absolutely, but it is not very significant in a campaign. And all trade resources as Kislev do give you various things. So you can get construction costs, you can get unit upkeep. If you get iron, this is one of the advantages that Katrin does have in her campaign, that she can get iron. So the benefits from an economic perspective as Kislev do exist in an extremely long campaign. If I were to, for instance, get 30 markets, 30 saltworks, or similar buildings that improve the income from markets, I would be looking at doubling the income of these markets. So at tier 3, we'd be generating 400 income as opposed to 200. So the scalability of Kislev's economy in the long term absolutely does exist. But the problem is that you are spending a lot of time, resources, and energy to get to a point that other races start at. Consider this. The greenskins at tier 1, they have more economic potential from a structure that's a quarter of the cost and generates 250 income. They pay 250, they get 250. Their tier 3 structure can produce more money than your tier 3 structure, even when accounting for the tradable resource production increase that you're going to get from caravans, which only applies to provincial capitals anyway. But that's just the greenskins. The High Elves, let's consider the High Elves as another example and consider their situation. Every High Elf Lord, Legendary Lord or Generic Lord, has the ability of increasing trade resource production faction-wide for the Merchant Lord skill, and that gives them 9% tradable resource production for each of them. and combine that with some other skills that the high elves do have, you're effectively what, five or six high elven lords with a very basic blue skill line from getting to a point that it requires you a tier 5 settlement to even compete on the same level. And notwithstanding the fact that the high elves have also significant economic modifiers. And the high elves do not have the strongest economy in the game. They are a powerful one. They're top 5 in the top 5, but they're not the strongest. Dark elves, greenskins, cafe, they do better. Then you have Kislev. But it's not simply a question of like how much money you can produce. Because you can, the amount of money you are producing in your campaign is going to be a paltry sum anyway. You can reduce recruitment costs by a fairly significant amount, and you can generate extra income from the farm estate. Absolutely. So you're looking at, if you have a farm estate and the trade quorum, you're looking at 300 income. But the other part of all of this is construction cost that you do have for buildings, which is also, it's not the highest, it is certainly not the lowest. And you're going to want a lot of these buildings. You do have modifiers. You do have the atomans who can give you various benefits, growth benefits, income benefits in your campaign. Now, I don't have an ataman that buffs the income, but you can get atomans that do that give you that particular effect. But again, even with all of these benefits, it requires you to play a campaign that's easily 40, 60 turns to even reach a point that other races start with. And what that means really in practice is that it will take you significantly more time to reach the faction potential that many other races, including ones that in a lot of ways in terms of army rosters and so on, are actually worse off. But it means that it will take you a very, very long time to reach a point that other races start at, as opposed to where Kislev is. And that is where the problem really kicks in. Because you're always playing catch up, you never have enough money, you struggle in maintaining armies, and you have a complicated situation, or one of the most complicated situations in every single campaign as Kislev to deal with the exception of Astankia, but Astankia herself has to deal with Kislev eventually, one way or another. The most amount of power you can gain as Kislev is confederating the various Kislevi factions. By the way, pro tip, if you want to confederate Prague, for instance, don't make a military alliance with them. Make every other agreement except the defensive or military alliance with them. You can even declare war on their enemies, or you may not do so. But start building good relations with them, but not the military alliance. Actually, having a military alliance will actually count against you for confederation purposes, especially if you're strong. So let Prague on their own, arrive there before they get kicked out from Prague by like Frat or the Norskins over here. They should be in a desperate situation and you can confederate them. That's the trick, I might add, to confederation. And not just with Prague and across the board. Like, don't form military alliances, get good relations all the same with the faction, and eventually, like, once these AI factions get take enough damage from fighting certain foes, they will be primed for confederation. That is the key for it. But from an economic standpoint, Kislev is not in a great spot. Okay, what about unit recruitment and unit upkeep? Well, Tier 2 units like Armored Cossars, which you want, or even regular Cossars, are 135. That is a fairly significant amount. That is higher than what the High Elves have to pay, and the High Elves generally have a better economy than you do. This is the thing about Kislev. It's not just a question that you're not generating a lot of money, but of the money you are generating, it is not enough to use for what you want. Yes, you can get things like infantry-focused Eye Switch Lords. That will help you. You can get that 30% upkeep for war sled units. Those things are available in a campaign, and there's other traits that are very significant in their own right. But again, you're playing catch up to what other races have to offer from the very beginning of their campaign, whereas you have to spend a significant amount of time, resources, and energy to get to that point. Even if everything lines up in the exact way you want it to, you are still playing catch-up. You can win a Kislev campaign, that's not really debatable. I mean, look at this situation. I've got 2 full stacks. I am trying to somehow get a third off because I need the flexibility a third stack would give me, but it's just not going to happen probably. But I am trying to get the third army, dealing with the Skaven to move in the Darklands, because I need that for the army. I need someone to hold this area while Boris Ursus moves in the Darklands. This is the thing. This is the impact of not having a strong economy. Flexibility, or lack thereof. When you have fewer armies in a camp, when you have less income, it means you have fewer armies. When you have fewer armies, it means you're less flexible on the campaign map than races that can afford many armies in their campaign. This is the reason Dark Elves, Greenskins, and others can dominate the campaign map when you're playing them. There are certainly races that do well with fewer armies and have a limited income. Wood Elves, actually, surprisingly, have very limited income because they only have a couple of trees that they can use, and they need surplus points to not just build their economic structures, but to upgrade them. So that is absolutely a problem in a Wood Elf campaign, and one of the main limiting factors. Notwithstanding the fact that Wood Elves do not need a lot of territory to generate their economy, and notwithstanding the fact that Wood Elves do not care about raising every settlement to the ground that isn't their precious trees, the reason their campaign works is, one, each individual army is really powerful, and they don't even need to worry about defending a settlement because their settlements are some of the most formidable defensive locations in the entire game. Attacking a Wood Elf forest is something that you don't do easily. A Wood Elf forest has its basic garrison is made up of some really crazy units. You throw in a couple of regiments right now and you can have Doomstacks attacking it and you won't lose it. You cannot say the same about the settlements of, say, Kislev and many other races, even the major settlements. Even a city like Prague is actually not quite there in terms of the units it has. Like, consider the garrison of Prague. A couple armor Kossars, which are decent enough, some regular Kossars, and some dervishes, of course. And, of course, the Ataman. Then we consider the garrison of Griffinwood. Glade Guard, much better unit than what is available. And keep in mind, this is a basic garrison that's not really that great. Or the garrison, like the garrison should probably be similar in all these places, but this army actually is better. And the layout of the settlement actually favors the defender more than the attacker. In many sieges, the layout actually favors the attacker as opposed to the defender. Wood Elves are the exception because they have these open settlements, so they can actually deploy their defensive army properly and make use of their strong defensive firepower in an effective fashion. But they are an exception. They're a race that does well with limited armies in the campaign, but because they don't really have to worry too much about the defense of their settlements, they don't have to worry too much about conquering other territory. They can burn it to the ground, and they can form a wall of military alliances to protect them by training away territory they don't need to other factions. They might want to take certain settlements, like Drakenhof and Altdorf, for certain benefits that are provided there, but those are the exception, not the rule. And vast majority of factions work on the principle, the more armies you have, which requires more money, the more money you have, the more armies you have, the more armies you have, the more flexibility you have. And that principle applies, by the way, for the Wood Elves and Warriors of Chaos. There's a reason Orion is the strongest legendary lord of the Wood Elves, is because he ain't limited by money in his campaign. That's for damn certain when you are playing him. And suddenly you break the rules of the game in a very clear and cut way. And that is why when I talk about like the economic situation, it isn't irrelevant. It's about achieving more efficiently early on. And it is about achieving things early on in a campaign as opposed to later on. Because some people will make the argument, well, you know, in long term, in like 100 turns or something like that, Kislev can reach parity with other races. It doesn't matter, as far as I see it. It doesn't matter because like, consider this. This campaign is over. Like, I'm turn 20. I've achieved my short campaign victory conditions. I just need to achieve my long campaign victory conditions. But like in 20 turns, this campaign is finished. There's no one that's going to stop me. All they can do, like if you can't win a campaign in 20, 40 turns, like that's when a campaign gets decided whether or not you lose it. That's when there's the only possibility outside of like an ultimate endgame crisis that you can actually lose a campaign in any way, shape, or form. Everything else is rather meaningless and fluff. So having that early game economic potential is actually going to be very important for the success of the campaign. Some people do play campaigns more slowly, but I do have to simply ask the question, how many times has anyone watching this video lost a campaign long term, unless you are talking about an endgame crisis? How many times have you ended up in a situation that was untenable beyond the mid-game. Like, mid-game being turn 60. That is what I would be curious about. Because I am fairly certain the answer to that is that the vast majority of campaigns are decided within the first 40, 60 turns at most. And everything else is fluff that doesn't really matter, doesn't impact one way. It's just about slowing down. Like, there is one situation I heard about, like someone ending up playing a campaign as Tretch, finding himself at wars with both the dwarves and all of Cathay, so sandwiched between dwarves and Cathay. So you can certainly have a situation like that taking place in your campaign, but I think those kind of situations are relatively rare. Personally, of all the campaigns I've played, and I've played lengthy ones, of all the campaigns I've played in Warhammer 3, I really can't... I'm struggling to remember any particular campaign where in the long term I really ended up losing it. Maybe one as Drazov, because I fucked up in the way I expanded without taking into account that Grimgor was going to declare war. But even then, I actually managed to solve that situation. It was just like, oh, I screwed up, okay. So I got slowed down for a couple of turns, lost a good portion of my economy, but I still won in the end. That's what I mean about early game potential. That's where having parity in a campaign in the economy of various races, and, well, not parity, because when we talk about economy, we have to understand things like recruitment costs, recruitment upkeep, supply lines, potential of territory, military potential, diplomatic situation in campaign. It's not so simple. No system exists in complete isolation. One of the things, believe it or not, one of the things that actually keeps Kislev alive, and one of the things the reason you succeed as Kislev in a campaign is while your economy is garbage tier really, the one thing that keeps you going, keeps the money flowing, is you have a lot of people to fight. In fact, in this campaign, like, the only thing that's really limiting me is, like, I kind of defeated the people I wanted to fight. I could have fought Trog, but it's like, I just decided not to. I had already fought and smashed his armies to pieces at one point. He recovered from that situation. I could fight Azazel, but it's not my interest to fight Azazel. I want him to beat up Kastaltin so I can confederate Kastaltin. Then I'll beat them up. And what then? It's like, well, I'm just marching towards Drazov, and I'll deal with Drazov with 2, maybe 3 armies if I can manage to get the third sorted out. That is the situation. That is one of the things that can keep you going in a situation with a limited campaign. Some of the worst campaigns, some of the hardest campaigns are where you not only lack the needed resources, but you don't even have the enemies to fight. One of the problems in Kugaf's campaign is everyone he can fight is significantly more powerful than him. Throw Kugaf in the middle of the Empire, he'd do far better. Despite all the inherent issues of Nurgle. Just having a lot of enemies means post-battle loot, experience, means power in of itself. But that doesn't change the fact that just because you can make a campaign work through post-battle loot, it doesn't change the fact that the economy of a particular race is pretty awful, and that is absolutely the case for Kislev and other races. Think of Tzeentch having a poor economy. You can build up a good economy as Tzeentch, but requires, again, far more effort. And I do think it's a balancing issue of the campaigns, and I think really Creative Assembly, if there's one thing I would really like Creative Assembly to do that I don't feel they really do, is to really consider the balancing situation on campaign map. This is not, I wish to emphasize, this is not the same as saying I want every campaign to feel the same. But I think there is a baseline of good economy, good growth, good casualty replenishment every race should have, and every campaign should have. Having a good dynamic flow. One of the things that I really appreciate about the Old World mod, as opposed to Immortal Empires, is that there's some genuine thought and care and effort, not quite across the board, but there is some genuine thought, effort, and energy put in by Chaos Robbie and the people working on that behind, okay, what's going to make for a good campaign dynamic. It's still a work in progress. It's not perfect, but there's clearly been some effort put in there. Whereas with Kislev, whereas with Immortal Empires, it just feels messy how it ends up being. Some campaigns work really well. Some campaigns work really poorly. And Kislev's campaigns, with the exception of Boris Orsis, are certainly the ones that generally work poorly. Kostin signing out.